Hello, AP Environmental Science students. In this screencast, we're going to continue going over Chapter 1. Specifically, we're going to look at Chapter 1.3. Chapter 1, again, is called Environmental Problems, Their Causes, and Sustainability. All of today's notes are based on Living in the Environment, the 16th edition, by Miller and Spoolman. So Chapter 1.3 is called How Are Our Ecological Footprints Affecting the Earth? And the main idea here is that as our ecological footprints grow, we are depleting and degrading more of the Earth's natural capital. So some of the things we need to talk about before we go into actually how our footprints are being affected is some vocab. And again, a lot of this vocab is repeats from Chapter 25 that we covered last week, but I feel that the review is good. So first one is resource. And a resource is anything that's obtained from the environment to meet our needs and wants. Conservation means the management of natural resources with the goal of minimizing resource waste and sustaining supplies for current and future generations. The big key with conservation is not that we have enough, but again, those future generations have enough. So there's enough to perpetuate human population to live like we do at the level that we do. A perpetual resource is a resource that's renewed continuously. So we say that the sun is a perpetual resource because we expect it to last for at least another 6 billion years. Some of our resources are renewable. A renewable resource is considered anything that can be replenished fairly quickly. And when I say quickly, I'm talking about geologic time. So quickly can be anywhere from hours to hundreds of years. So these are things like forests, grassland, fisheries, fresh water, fresh air, and fertile soil. When we talk about renewable resources, we talk about sustainable yields. So sustainable yields are the highest rate at which a renewable resource can be used indefinitely without reducing its supply. When we exceed a renewable resource replacement rate, the available supply begins to shrink, and we call that environmental degradation. So, because of our population growth, a lot of our renewable resources are being degraded. And this is due to a lot of things. This is a figure right out of your textbook, but it highlights the major ways that we are degrading our natural resources. So everything from air pollution, global warming, soil erosion, shrinking forests, decreased wildlife habitats, species extinction, aquifer depletion, declining ocean fisheries, and water pollution. Each of these things that we're talking about here, we are actually going to go into a lot of detail throughout the year in AP Environmental Science. So when we discuss renewable resources, we have to talk about property or resource rights, meaning how available are these resources to the average person. So the first type of property or resource rights is private property. And that's where individuals or firms own the rights to land, minerals, etc. So if you own a house, that is your private property. You own everything that is in that space of land. Common property is where the rights to certain resources are held by large groups of people. So, for example, about 1/3 of the land in the United States is owned by all citizens and is managed by the government. So these are things like national parks. Lastly, we have open access renewable resources, which is when things are owned by no one and are available for use by anyone with little or no charge. So things are included in open access renewable resources are things like air, open ocean, groundwater that everybody has access to. No one person or one group owns those things. So the big thing we're going to look at with this chapter is tragedy of the commons. And this is the idea that resources that are common or open access are vulnerable to degradation because no one is in charge of controlling its use. So the common mindset is, hey, if I don't use this resource, someone else will. If I pollute just a little bit, it's not enough to really make a major difference. And it's a renewable resource, so we'll get more anyway. Which actually isn't true. Because if everybody's thinking that, everybody's using it, everybody's polluting a little bit, you're going to degrade that resource fairly quickly. So some solutions that have been suggested to combat the tragedy of the commons are to use shared resources at rates that are well below their estimated sustainable yield. So then if that one person or two people does come along and say like, hey, I'm going to take more for myself, it's not the end of the world. And to convert open access resources to private ownership. So there is more regulation of how things are being used and how often resources are being depleted. We also have non-renewable resources, and these are the things we hear about on the news all the time. One of the major concerns, especially things like coal and oil. But renewable or non-renewable resources exist in a fixed quantity, or it takes millions of years to replenish. Remember, renewable resources we said were hours to hundreds of years. This one is millions of years or longer to replenish. So some examples of non-renewable resources are the obvious, like energy resources, coal and oil, metallic resources such as copper and aluminum, and non-metallic resources such as salt and sand. So here's the 3 R's that you've been hearing about since you were probably about 3 years old, but non-renewable resources can be recycled. So it's our 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce means to decrease use. Reuse means using a resource over and over again for the same purpose, in the same form. And recycle means processing waste into new materials. So because of our growing human population and advancing technologies, our ecological footprints are also growing. An ecological footprint is the amount of biologically productive land and water needed to supply the people in a particular area with resources and to absorb and recycle the waste and pollution produced by such resource use. The per capita ecological footprint is the average ecological footprint per person. So if we take a look at this figure, this is right out of your textbook as well. Here it shows the total ecological footprint for the United States in percentage. So the U.S. is taking up 25%. The European Union, 19%, China, 18%, India, 7%, and Japan, 5%. However, if you look at their per capita footprint, we see some kind of weird, funky things going on. So, especially with Japan at the bottom here. Even though Japan has the smallest of these 5 total ecological footprint, its per capita footprint is fairly large. And the reason that is because Japan is a fairly small country with a fairly small population compared to the rest of these countries that we're actually looking at. So because it has such a huge per capita footprint, it's actually making a pretty big dent in our percentage of global ecological capacity. So your book looks at a case study which is talking about China's new affluent consumers. So China's kind of is considered a developing country, but a lot of its population is starting to become more affluent. Currently, China is the leading consumer of wheat, rice, meat, coal, fertilizer, steel, and cement. It's the second largest consumer of oil after the U.S., and this is because their population is so gigantic. If China's population continues to grow, by 2033, China will need 2/3 of the world's grain production and more than the current world's production of oil. So why is China now putting this immense pressure on the Earth's capital? Again, like I said, a lot of that middle class is attaining more affluent lifestyles, which means they're consuming more resources and creating more waste. In fact, they are showing that over 700,000 people in China and India combined, which is more than twice the amount of the United States, are now meeting this middle class affluent lifestyle. So that's creating 7,000 people's worth more of waste and larger ecological footprints. So cultural changes over time have also helped our increase of ecological footprints. So culture is the whole of a society's knowledge, belief, technology, and practices. So Homo sapien culture has changed dramatically since the first known humans. We started off as hunter-gatherers, which left us with very small ecological footprints. We were basically getting what we could obtain. Then we had the agricultural revolution. We were able to actually plant things, grow things, sell things, trade things with each other. So we started to make kind of an indent in a dent in our ecological footprint. Then the industrial medical revolution. Here we started to create technologies that required the use of fossil fuels, and we also had a medical revolution, which meant that people were living longer lives, our population was growing at a higher rate. And finally, we had the information globalization revolution, and this is kind of our big technology boom with electronics, computers, the internet. We were more interconnected than ever before with communication. Again, this is improving our lives, is improving communication, so scientific studies are going faster. We're having more discoveries. Technology is advancing at an even faster rate, and we're using even more resources. So these cultural changes are providing humans with more technology and energy to alter and control more of the planet to meet our basic needs. It's allowing for expansion of our population. Again, more food, more medicine. Our population can grow. But it's also leading to greater resource use, pollution, and environmental degradation. So again, all of these changes, while good for us, are ultimately bad for our planet because of these reasons and are increasing our ecological footprints on the earth.